All right, so we are starting our next lecture series on macromolecules. And so, from this, what we want to be able to do or feel comfortable doing is be able to construct and revise an explanation on the evidence to describe the biochemistry dealing with the four main molecules that make up most living mass: proteins, lipid, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids. And we want to be able to know what their function is and what they do for the cell itself. So, let's kind of start where we kind of have been. All right, we've been on this journey since the beginning of the year, learning about the levels of organization, starting with the basic unit of life, and that goes into making tissues, and those tissues then come together to form the organ system. So here we have the nervous system or the brain, and that other organs can work together to form the organ system, and then all those systems then come together to form the organism. Okay, so that's where we've been so far on our journey, but we want to kind of take a step back, go back to the cell, but now kind of ask ourselves, what are some of the components that make up the cell? And so we've had chemistry and understand that all matter is made up of, if you have mass and you take up space, you are made up of atoms. And so we want to kind of take a couple of steps back and look at what are these molecules that make up the cell. So in the previous lecture, we reviewed about atoms and their role in matter and making molecules and such. But the question we want to kind of look at here is, what kind of molecules are required for us to make the cell that eventually goes into making the actual organism? And when we look at all spans of life, we can actually see that most biomass is comprised of four main categories of these molecules, these macromolecules. Macro meaning big, all right? And so these are molecules that are not easily passed through the membrane. They have to go through a protein channel and all of that. And so what are these molecules? Well, number one is carbohydrates, okay? Then we have lipids, fats, proteins, and nucleic acids. Now, whether or not we're talking about carbohydrates, nucleic acids, and proteins, one of the things that all of these molecules share is that they all have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms, okay? And remember, we talked about how 96% of atoms that make up all biomass, anything that's living tissue, is made up of six main elements: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, or CHNOPS is how often we actually call it. Now, so let's kind of dive into the structure and function of these particular types of molecules. So, but before we do that, let's talk about carbon. You know, we talked about the fact that every single molecule has carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. We talked about the properties of water already. We got to talk about carbon now. And so one of the big things about carbon is that it has four valence electrons based on its structure. And because of that, carbons can make all different types of bonds in different orientations and in different manners. And so as a result of this, life has been able to utilize these different bonding configurations of these carbon molecules to get different types of reactions. So I want to take a look at this right here. So this is an example of a lipid molecule, and these are steroid hormones, okay? And so these hormones, this one is estradiol, which is a primitive pre-form of estrogen, and then this is testosterone. Now, these hormones are essential in growth and development in life, and that depending on the exposure of these particular types of hormones, that can affect the way the cell grows and develops. But take note that most of the molecule is exactly the same. The one difference that determines more female features compared to that of male features is the fact that this is a double bond O oxygen, and this one is just a single bond OH, or a hydroxide. But the missing of that hydrogen atom is enough to cause the cells to form differently. So, again, let's make it a shout out to these elements. And one of the things that we want to know as we go through these elements is what elements are in which macromolecule. So again, we have our carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, aka the chinops. So, as we talk about these macromolecules, there's two definition of terminologies that we want to put out. All right. So, when we talk about these macromolecules, we want to talk about how they build into being these big molecules. So, I'm going to first start off with the prefix mono. Mono means one. Okay. And poly means many, okay? And so what monomers are individual building blocks of the molecule. Monomers are, and I'll kind of put this on here, are building blocks of macromolecules. And so through bonding, actually with the addition or release of water, through the process of what we call polymerization, they can come together to form the polymer, which is the other way of saying macro or large molecules. So we want to understand what are the building blocks or monomers, and what polymer does that form into in our macromolecules. So let's take a look at our first one. Our first one is carbohydrates. Now, when you think of carbohydrates, automatically come to mind and think primary energy source. Okay. And really, when it comes to primary energy source being carbohydrates, we're going to later see how all of those bonds within that sugar releases energy for the organism. So, carbohydrates, they are made up of primarily just three atoms: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay, so fairly simple, but yet pretty universal on the way that this molecule of glucose or carbohydrates can be used for energy. Now, the monomer or the building block for our carbohydrates is a monosaccharide. All right. So when we talk about monosaccharides, these are examples of things like regular old sugar, glucose, sucrose. Anything with that OSE on the end is representing something that is sweet. All right. Now, this molecule, as we're going to find out, this glucose is going to be important for a process called cellular respiration. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the year, but this is where we're going to take all the energy that's stored within these bonds of this molecule and transform it to an actual function within our cell. Now, we see these monosaccharides all the time. If you eat something and it's sweet, it has monosaccharides. However, there's another type of what we call more complex. So this is monosaccharides are more simple. Polysaccharides are more complex. And what these are is molecules that are just one glucose that's bound to another glucose with another glucose. So polysaccharides is this repeating chains of these monosaccharides put together. Now, this is where we start seeing things like polysaccharides being referred to as starches or cellulose. So let's take a look at those a little bit more here. So when we talk about our glucose molecule, okay, the glucose is going to be C6H12O6. And when we see that, what we're talking about is the fact that our glucose has 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. Now, what is the function of carbohydrates? They are quick, or what we call our primary energy sources. But we also find carbohydrates in a lot of other functions. This one is highlight worthy. They form the backbone of the DNA. All right, and we're going to be talking about DNA a little bit more later on. Now, how can we tell a molecule is a carbohydrate by its name? It has that OSE. All right. If you see OSE, that is going to be a sugar. Now, here are the different types of starches that we see here. Again, when you look at this, if I were to break one of these off, this would now become a glucose. So when we talk about all of these different types of starches, all it is repeated units of glucoses bonded together. Now, this stuff right here, we're talking about things that are found in the vegetables. So we're talking about starchy foods, potatoes, pastas, and those types of things. And with starches are going to have more potential energy than glucose, okay? And you might be asking yourself, why? What is it about the repeating units that would give more energy? Well, you got to remember, chemical bonds equals stored energy. And when you break those bonds, you release that energy. And so when we have a starch, we have a lot more bonds in this molecule than we would with a simple one piece of glucose. And so we would get more potential energy with starches. Now, cellulose is like starch, all right, but cellulose is found in plants. And this is the reason why you can't just go out and grab a handful of grass and chow down like our bovine cow friends can. And the reason is that cellulose fibers are just repeated units of these starch molecules that are bound very much together. And with all these bonds, it makes it difficult for us to be able to break down and process this food. That's the reason if you ever were to eat grass, it would come out just fully grass at the other end, because our bodies are not able to process all of these different bonds. So again, we have a lot of different types of